Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to The Talking Point, the show that brings you guys into the studio to discuss the hottest and latest topics from around the world of football. Dougie Critchley is joining me today. For us, a little bit of deja vu. They never saw the video last week. We won't talk about it. How are you doing?
Yeah, to explain, we did shoot a positive Liverpool video last week before the 5-2 thrashing at the hands of Real Madrid, which obviously meant that it couldn't go out, really. We need to restructure it, redo it again, because a lot has changed in a week. It's been a crazy week for Liverpool.
It has indeed. And last week we had Harriet on the show talking positively. We brought her back because we need to talk about Liverpool again. Harriet, firstly, how are you doing?
I'm good. I didn't take it personally when you didn't put the video out. My first time on and you just were like, yeah, we can't use that. I won't take it personally, but I'm good, thank you.
Good to hear, good to hear. Well then, let's get straight into it and talk about Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp, because over the last 5 games, they've won 2, they've drawn 1 and lost 2 as well. Now those 2 losses came against Real Madrid at home to Anfield, losing 5-2 in the Champions League, and a 3-2 away loss to Wolves, who they actually play tonight when this video goes live. So who knows what the result will be by the end of that game. Now, their loss to Real Madrid was the heaviest home European defeat in Liverpool's illustrious history. Now, if they do win, though, all of their games in hand, because I do feel very quickly there's been a negative spin. If they do win all of their games in hand, Liverpool very quickly are only 3 points off of Spurs in 4th place in the Premier League. Now, I want to kind of talk about several things about Liverpool. Let's touch upon the forward line, firstly, Harriet, because I think out of all the positive things, the forward line actually isn't too bad. I mean, I think personally, it's not the biggest issue here. You've got the 6th best record in the league. You're 3 goals behind United in the Premier League. XG would actually suggest that Liverpool have been quite unlucky in front of goal and should have scored another 8 more goals than they currently have. Is the front line, the forward line, the least of your worries so far, Harriet?
It's definitely lower down on my list of concerns, yeah, just because of the players that we have available and also the players we brought in that area, and Gakpo in January strengthening the options in that forward line. But you touched on it there. The issue has been missing the big chances this season. I think there's been so many games where you came away from it and it's been a 0-0 or we've lost 1-0 and you think, oh my God, we had so many chances to go ahead early in that game, and things just haven't clicked it into place, and goals that Salah would usually definitely score have been missed chances, and Nunes has taken a while to settle in, and Gakpo as well, finding his feet a little bit. The issue I have with the forward line at the moment is that I think you need a minimum of 2 of Salah, Diaz and Nunes available. I think if you've got 2 of them in there, it absolutely fine. It doesn't really matter who the third is, but the issue is Diaz has been out for a long period now with injury. And you saw the other day when we played Crystal Palace, when Nunes isn't there either, it does make things a little bit more difficult because you just haven't really got that 2 players who are that focal point and can really provide that constant goal threat. Salah just seems to be evidently always available, and like I don't want to jinx that, but he is always that constant in that forward line. But if you could bring one alongside him that was also a bit more constant and consistent, that would be really nice. But I think at the moment that does need to be Nunes or Diaz.
I mean, Harriet mentions there, Dougie, about Mohamed Salah. Obviously, out of all the front line, he's the one you have to worry about the least. But is there a little bit of a concern about how he's not been as hot this season?
Yeah, I think maybe slightly, but then I think everything around him, the things that he's been able to rely on for so long, that relationship with Henderson and Trent, which I think has been the bedrock of their success over the last 5 years, hasn't been at the same level. I think Jordan Henderson's had a massive drop-off. Age seems to have really affected him in the last few years. Trent has had so many questions about his defending. I think it maybe has slightly affected his confidence going forward in many ways. So that's changed for Salah. But I think if you look at his goals and assists, really, you know, it's not as spectacular as last year or the previous seasons, but I think it's still pretty solid. So I wouldn't put too much of the blame on Salah. It just feels like, you know, they needed Nunes or Gakpo to really hit the ground running in front of goal. And Nunes' return is actually not too bad, but they had a player that they lost in the summer in Sadio Mane, who was so consistent in a number of areas in terms of his pressing, his defensive work rate, his link play, his finishing. And it just needed one player to really instantly hit the ground running. And as Harriet so rightly points out, with Luis Diaz and Jota out for so long, it really needed a big return from one of those 2 players, and I don't think it's really fair to expect them to instantly hit the levels of Sadio Mane, who's been one of the best wingers in the league since really his Southampton days. I
mean, this season really does feel like a year where Liverpool are going to have a bit of a get the team used to it, get the new players into the side. Let's talk about the midfield then, because this is an area of Liverpool's squad that I think has always been the biggest talking point here. Now, midfielders over the age of 30. Now, by no means I'm saying once you hit 30, you're done, but you are definitely getting towards the end of your career. Maybe not if you're James Milner, who is now 37, but Thiago, Henderson and James Milner all over 30. Naby Keita is another issue as well. That's one that Football Daily definitely got wrong, especially Patrick Van Straten. His game against Crystal Palace, Harriet mentioned it. I mean, if you missed it, well done, because it definitely wasn't one to be watching. He had 4 fouls in the game, got a yellow card, and had 10 duels lost against Palace. I mean, their midfield, in Decore especially, he's somebody that looks fantastic. Now, I think a lot of the talk, Harriet, has been about how Jordan Henderson, Fabinho, Thiago, it doesn't seem like they've got a lot left in the tank, especially after last year's 63 games that you guys played in the season. What do you think is the biggest issue for that midfield? Is it the fact that these guys just can't be doing the job anymore? They can't be playing this amount of games. They essentially don't have that energy anymore. Yeah,
it's really difficult to say because against both Everton and Newcastle in the 2 games that Liverpool won before the Real Madrid game, Fabinho and Henderson came in. They were playing alongside Bajcetic, who's been an 18-year-old star and standout of the season. And they looked re-energized and they looked like they were finding their form again. And I just don't feel like with players who performed so consistently well for seasons on end, as recently as last season, you can completely write them off and say that's them done. Obviously, they've had so many games in the legs from last season. I think that's taken a real physical impact, but mentally as well. And the players have actually spoken quite candidly about the fact that, you know, when we've spoken to press conferences or when we've had interviews with them, about the fact that it has been difficult to pick up after a season where you're going for everything, and you do feel that level of disappointment when you reach the last day or the final of the Champions League and you don't manage to come away with it at the end of it. And they've come into this year with sky high expectations, and it's been difficult to live up to. And the confidence, I think, especially in that midfield area, is really taken a hit. But we'll reference Crystal Palace game. The starting age of that Liverpool team was nearing 30 years old, and especially in the midfield area, you could see that was contributing to a real lack of creativity, dynamism, a real lack of progressive passing, and really looking forward. I think at the moment the priority is don't lose, and sometimes that leads to a bit less risk taking, which is actually what Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool has been built on. What the success has been built on. It's this risk versus reward, and now it's being a bit more averse to taking risks. And midfield for Klopp is very functional. It's got a job to do. It's always been sort of the bedrock of which he builds his teams around. It's a hard role to play, and I think when the rest of the team around you aren't performing particularly well, the defence isn't as solid, the forwards aren't scoring goals they were in previous seasons, it becomes increasingly difficult. And for me, it spoke volumes that you take Bajcetic out against Palace and the performance levels just really drop, and you're then relying, aren't you, on an 18-year-old to come in and pick it up, and that's a really difficult role for him to play as well, a lot of pressure. So yeah, age, mentality, maybe a little bit too much in the legs at the moment for them, and a lack of confidence is definitely impacting the middle of the park in particular.
I mean, Bajcetic has had an incredible season, all things considered. He is a shining star from a season that's been a little bit disappointing, that's for sure. I think it spoke a lot that actually in the second half against Real Madrid, when Klopp went to make changes in the midfield, rather than bringing on, say, Naby Keita or Oxlade-Chamberlain, who are more central midfielders, he did go for Harvey Elliott and James Milner, though James Milner can kind of play all over that pitch. Dudes, is there anything because I think obviously the title's about how Liverpool can try and obviously turn their season around, that midfield. What would be one of the first changes you'd make straight away? Or would you make any changes and just kind of keep, it's a big one to throw on you, I know that. Fix Liverpool's squad, what I'm saying to you. Fix Liverpool's season. But would it be keeping Bajcetic in the side, making sure that he's kind of got the experience around him when needed, and or is it like also trying out some of the other youngsters?
Well, I think they've created a rod for their own back this year, really. And I think Klopp probably has admitted that they were wrong to not target more midfielders in the summer. I know they wanted Tchouaméni. They've been linked to him over the previous 18 months, but it didn't feel like there was a lot of a big plan. It was like Tchouaméni, okay, no one else then this summer. It didn't feel like Bellingham was on the table last summer. I know they're making big strides to try and get him, this summer. I'd be very surprised if that happens, just because he's been at the last few years at a nearly club effectively in Dortmund that haven't really got over the line in any of the massive competitions. Does he want to spend 2-3 years at Liverpool trying to build up to a Premier League title challenge? I think Bellingham makes an enormous difference to this Liverpool side, but it's not just put Jude Bellingham in and everything's fixed. And some of those issues are down to injuries as well. So I do think Liverpool will get better towards the end of the season. Konate, Jota, Luis Diaz coming back. Like, these are the players that had more experience than the players that have had to play a lot of games this year. And I think that really has affected the performance level of the entire team. In terms of the midfield, I think the dream midfield is still Fabinho sitting, Bajcetic next to him, and Thiago on the other side. I think that midfield could work quite nicely. Fabinho's form has not been good enough so far this season. He looks absolutely exhausted. but I don't think you can trust an 18-year-old, as Harriet said, maybe in that position in some of the bigger games towards the end of the year. And actually, he's looked much better playing in a left-hand-sided role or right-hand-sided role in recent weeks, I think. And then I think Thiago, on his day, is their best midfielder by a distance. So I think it's a matter of just getting those players into a cohesive unit in midfield and just building belief, really, because it feels like a lot of their current issues are just a mentality thing. Like, as soon as Real Madrid got back to 2-2 last week, Liverpool sort of just fell apart. In the second half, they barely offered anything. Against Crystal Palace, it felt like their confidence was so low. They didn't feel like they could take the game by the scruff of the neck against Palace, and it was a miserable watch, as we've already said. I know Salah hit the bar and Gakpo had a great chance, but other than that, it was really, really pretty miserable. And we're not used to seeing that from a Liverpool side that have been defined by energy and intensity in the last few years.
For sure. Okay, well, let's touch upon then the defence, because that is the other big issue here. Of course, there have been injuries. Dougie mentioned that Konate's on his way back. Van Dijk is obviously now just come back from injury. The form of Trent Alexander-Arnold as well has taken a huge hit. Matip is another one. I mean, Jurgen Klopp kind of mentioned it after the Real Madrid game, saying, I think we gave all 5 goals away to them, and that means we could have done better. They've played 35 games this season. Liverpool conceded 47 goals. I mean, at the same stage right now in 2021-22, Liverpool had just shipped 30, which is 0.86 goals per game, which was an impressive record. And when you put into the fact as well that Real Madrid only had 6 shots on target and scored 5 of them, there are reasons to be concerned. Harriet, what do you think is because I do think there are several issues, but what do you think is the biggest concern right now? And do you think it would just be fixed by getting Konate back into that side? Because personally, I also think set pieces is a little bit of an issue for Liverpool as well.
Yeah, set pieces, you definitely saw that in Real Madrid, and that was maybe the goal that killed us off. Konate not being in has been a huge issue, because there's definitely been a lack of confidence, whoever's playing alongside Van Dijk, whether that is Matip or Gomez. And the manager actually said a quite interesting comment, I can't remember which match it was after now, but said you can put a plan in place all week in training and you can have a really good week and think everyone looks 100% on it. And then there's one defensive mistake that is so out of character for these players, a back pass that just doesn't land, Allerton making a mistake like we saw against Real Madrid. These things that are so out of the ordinary, how do you plan against them? And that's really difficult. But at the moment, it just seems to be those things happening far too often. And against Crystal Palace, they were lucky not to concede a goal, because there was a few times where it was bad defending and the ball was given away far too easily, played through far too easily, giving a lot of teams a lot of space in wide areas as well. And usually, yes, you can maybe pin some of that on the fullbacks. People are talking about Trent's form in particular, I know, but he's always been someone that pushes really far up the pitch, and he's had that cover behind him and had that trust in his teammates that they will be able to cover and cover him behind if he does make those runs and play in more attacking areas. That's not really been happening. So I think as much as you can look at the goals conceded and blame it solely on the defence, actually the pressing from the front hasn't been as effective as it has been in recent seasons, and the cover from midfield equally so. Van Dijk, I'm his biggest fan, I always will be, but he's just coming back from injury, and the problem at Liverpool at the moment is you don't get a grace period. You have to come in and hit the ground running straight away from the first game you're back. You can't even have 30 minutes where you're not on it, because you'll get punished. So that's been difficult as well. But yeah, a consistency of partnership would be nice. And I think Konate and Van Dijk is by a mile at the moment our best partnership. And if we just had those two available for a period of games, I think everything would feel infinitely better.
Well, it's interesting you say that they say in football that when you get injured, it can kind of take you that same amount of time that you missed to get back to your best on the pitch when you are fit. And obviously for Van Dijk, that's been a little bit of time. And again, previously when he had that long-term injury, maybe he's not quite back to scratch just yet. Okay, Dukes. One thing I'd also want to quickly touch upon that people have mentioned is a lot of people kind of I've seen a lot of a trend recently, people blaming Jurgen Klopp's in-game tactics, thinking that he's got it wrong. I think it's especially after how Eric Ten Hag has been praised a lot recently. Do you think Klopp has had a bit of a rough time during in-game moments? Because to be fair, throughout his career, he's been pretty good at it.
Yeah, he has, definitely. I think he's known as a pretty good tactician, He's made some good substitutions in the past. I think it's difficult at the moment because, as Harriet says, he's often having to respond to a really negative period in-game as well. And, he's not a miracle worker. These are players that are coming off the bench that either haven't had a lot of football because they've been injured or aren't just in a great moment of form themselves. And you're basically trying to cover a wound with a sort of broken plaster, and there's just more damage being done. So I wouldn't lay too much of the blame on Klopp's in-game management. I'd more do it at his squad building. I think over the last few years, it's been probably quite obvious that Liverpool needed to make more changes than they have. I know it's easy to say in hindsight, but particularly in midfield. And I know he's been slightly hamstrung by FSG and the amount of money they're willing to spend, etc. They're now looking for investment, or were looking for investment. Now that's off the table because there wasn't that much interest. You know, the transfer committee has changed beyond all recognition. They're going through another change at the end of this year when Julian Ward steps down. So there's just been far too many things just to be like, it's just injuries, it's just Klopp, it's just form. It's a mess, and everything is going up on top of each other, and it's just creating this horror show of a season.
Indeed. Okay, then, Harry, I also want to touch upon as well, there are the next games for Liverpool, the next 5 games. You are facing, obviously, Wolves tonight in the FA Cup. You've got Manchester United, Real Madrid, and Man City in the next 5 games. How are you feeling about that? And do you think this period could really be the make or break for the season?
Zach, I wish it was in the FA Cup. We're out of that already.
Oh, sorry, Premier League, apologies.
Have me crying here on the Zoom call. No, it's obviously a tough period, and I think you've got that Real Madrid one away in the Champions League, which is everyone's gonna dread a little bit, and I hate to say that, but it's obviously going to be such a hard task. If it was reversed and they were coming back to Anfield, things would be a little bit different, but that's not the case. Wolves, we spoke about it a bit earlier, but it's the 4th time we played them in this calendar year, and we've had a heavy defeat to them in the last few weeks. I think that's going to be a really difficult one, but it's got to be a game where they just find that bit of consistency and get back on track. And we've been saying this for far too long, that this is a game they can't lose. But I will say is that the expectations are different this season, and I think as a fan it's actually been really hard for people to adjust their expectations because we've been going toe to toe with Manchester City. A draw has not been good enough under any circumstances in any season because of how good they are and the levels of form that they're able to sustain. This season, I think there's just got to be a bit more acceptance that, okay, we got a draw against Crystal Palace away, let's carry on, move forward, it's a point, let's carry on and try and push for those top 4 spots, because everyone in and around that 4th spot is dropping points and making mistakes. So yes, going to be a really difficult period, and some big games in there which are going to be tough, and a few of them away from home as well. And we've got Arsenal coming to us on Easter weekend, I believe, so that will be a difficult one. But you'd never be scared of them in the past, is what I will say. Like last season, I would never have been scared of any opponent coming to Anfield. The trajectory is different now, but they still need to keep that positivity and belief internally, because otherwise you sort of lose that confidence in yourself, don't they? So yeah, the top 4 and just keeping the pressure on has to still be the target, and I do still think that's realistic for this Liverpool side.
Interesting. There we go. What do you think success for them this season? Do a quick one. If it's
Yeah,
Europa
definitely.
League, do you think that's okay?
Sorry?
If they finish in the Europa League, do you think that's okay?
No, because I think that completely ruins their summer business plan. They've got to get into the Champions League. I think, yeah, as Harriet says, that's the key.
Okay, there we have it, guys. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Harriet, thank you so much for helping us out and jumping on the video. For definite this time, this will go live.
Second debut.
For sure. Second debut, yeah. Brilliant again. Thank you so much, Harriet. We'll make sure your links and everything are in the description below if you guys at home want to check her out. If you guys haven't already, then like the video. Again, leave a comment on how you think Liverpool can restart their season. I think that's the rough title. Or fix their season, essentially that. And if you're not already, subscribe to Football Daily, and we'll see you very soon.